So the last piece of the puzzle is how does the test driver work? And this is actually a little different from before, so we're going to spend some time on it. The test driver is going to use the Java StructuredTaskScope concurrency model, although it's a very simple use of it. And we're going to take a look at the code that does this. And I'll also run the program as well. So let's take a look at the MathServices driver. And as you can see here, it's a Spring Boot application. It's not a Spring Boot test, because we can really only use Spring Boot test to test one thing at a time. We could test one microservice in isolation, but we want to run both of these microservices at the same time from the same client. So to do this, we auto-wire in the MathServices client we took a look at. Here's the main entry point. And then here's the run method. This method allows us to run this as if it was a command line application. It's actually really cool. And you can see that this thing implements the command line runner superclass, so we can make it run on the command line. What this does is it prints out a diagnostic, parses the arguments, and then it goes ahead and generates a bunch of random numbers and runs the tests. So the random number generation stuff is going to be pretty much what we looked at before, except integers rather than big fractions. Here's the run test method. This is really neat. So what it does is it's going to create two futures. One will have a list of prime results, and one will have a list of GCD results from each of the different microservices, respectively. We then go out and use the StructuredTaskScope shutdown on failure mechanism. And within this context, we fork off two virtual threads to check the primality, or primalities of the random integers, and to compute the GCDs of the same random integers. So these two calls both start up. They are going to run in parallel in the scope that we defined here in our try with resources block. We then go down and make the join call, and that's just going to wait for both of these tasks to complete. And if they complete successfully, then we're going to deal with the results. Otherwise, if something went wrong, we're going to throw the exception that occurred. So now let's assume, for sake of argument, both things worked. They went off and made in parallel separate calls to separate microservices. Great example of what we're doing here with an embarrassingly parallel program where we just want things to run in parallel. And we end up calling an options method to display the results, to print the results. And then down here, we simply take the future to the prime check and the future to the GCD. We get the results, which will be a list of either GCD params or a list of prime results. And then for each of the results, we go ahead and print them out. And that's pretty much what we do. At the very end, we exit, because we're running as a process, so we have to shut things down. So speaking of shutting things down and running things, let's go ahead and run this now. So the way this works is we go up here, and we're going to run, let's just start at the GCD application first. You can see it's a Spring application, Spring Boot application. So we start it, and you'll see what that does in a second. It's going to start up something here. This says, I am now running the GCD application. And in parallel with that, we can start up the primality application. And these are both now running as Spring applications, but of course, they're microservices. And if you take a look here, you can see what's going on. This is things starting up. So you can see it's starting up here. It's going to start up here at this port number for the GCD application. The primality application is going to start up on a slightly different port number with a different name. So we've got two different processes running, each running different microservices, each listening at different ports. And now all we need to do is we come along, and we're going to run our driver program. And this is going to start up as a new process. You'll see what it's doing. And as usual, it's yelling at us because we're using incubator module, et cetera, but that's all right. We know what we're doing. And then you can see here, it goes ahead and it makes those calls. And let's see, I don't know if I had, yeah, I guess I didn't actually turn on debugging in the servers. If I turned debugging on in the servers, we could actually see them responding to these calls. But what you see here is that this is the call that we made. You can see there's sending over a bunch of requests that are encoded this way. This is doing the one for primality checking. And you can see what we got back. We got back these prime result records, which had the prime candidate, and then either the smallest factor if it was non-prime, or 0 if it was prime. And you can see that there's a handful of ones that were 0, usually less primes than non-primes. That's just the way the prime number cookie crumbles. And then here's the GCD results, where you can see that was a record, and it had a GCD param part. And for each of these pairs of ints, we get back the GCD that was computed for that. So that's just showing you that we ran this as a process. It's a separate process. We could rerun this thing again, and it would take a different set of random integers and would start over again. But the services, the microservices, we didn't shut them down, so they're still running happily here in the background in other processes on my machine. And now we start again, and we get the results back. A little bit more ceremony required to launch the microservices and to run the client than when we just ran the test cases that we did for the bearer quotes case study and we did for the prime checker case study, because we've got multiple microservices. Production code wouldn't launch them manually. They would have some kind of a script, or they would use some type of orchestration framework, again, like Docker or Kubernetes or whatever. There's different orchestration frameworks. And as I mentioned before, those will be covered in a different class.